So the question is, how do you motivate something like that? Well, in the past, people used to think, give people feedback, show them where they're screwing up. And then, of course, they'll want to bounce back. And in fact, I was one of those people. I mean, I did one of the first studies that said setting specific goals to compensate for your weaknesses helps you change.
Mm.
40 years later, 35 years later, after I did that study, I realized that I was off. Although I believed the research that we got, I didn't really understand what the attribution was to the driving force. Now, with 39 longitudinal behavioral change studies through the Coaching Research Lab, 3 fMRI studies, 2 hormonal studies, we actually understand the internal psychophysiological mechanism around individuals changing in ways that hold our data. Some of our data goes out 5 to 7 years. And what we're finding so far, there may be other things, but right now there are 2 things that really help to ignite and sustain the efforts. One is a dream, a sense of your personal vision. The question we often ask is, if your life were fantastic 10 to 15 years from now, what would it be like? And, work might be part of that, but we're looking for the big picture. And we want people to dream, not goals. We don't want people to forecast. We want them literally to break with reality. Sometimes if people feel stuck or they've been living in a repressive political regime or country, or they've been in a particularly stultifying organization where fear and dissonance is the typical leadership style, sometimes we have to use what I call the more playful version of that to warm them up to get into that, which is, you just won $80 million after tax in the lottery. How does your work or life change? Um, but it seems very clear that neurologically, hormonally, and then the psychological process of affect allows you to be open to new ideas, to another person. And when that happens, your peripheral vision expands. You're looking at more in the environment. You'll consider the environment, not just narrow things.
Mm.
And it turns out that a lot of things that we have to do every day, like solve problems and analyze things financially, suppress that. That, Tony Jack's work on the opposing neural domains shows that that kind of analytic activity, which is useful and necessary for us to figure out what we want to have for dinner, but it suppresses this other that he calls the empathic, technically the default mode network, that allows you to be open. So the vision or the dream does this by helping you create a big picture, a deep sense of purpose. I think for most of us, a noble purpose. And in the process, it stimulates hope.
Mm.
And hope is one of those really powerful emotions that can not just give you a sense of movement, but help you keep going. Because inevitably, when you engage in a change process or learning, you're going to have a lot of these ups and downs. And it is the context, we now contend, for your change that has to be revitalizing. Unfortunately, specific goals are useful later in the process, but they enable you to focus, which you need to do to get something done. But if you start with that too early, you'll miss literally the excitement and joy of life. You'll miss the curiosity. That's one factor. The second one is what we call a resonant or caring relationship, whether it's with a particular coach or physician or parent or manager or friend or spouse or partner. It doesn't matter, but it's having what we find is more than just one or two of these resonant, caring relationships that stimulate a deep sense of gratitude and compassion. So all of a sudden, you can step outside of yourself. I mean, in the last chapter of our recent book, Ellen and Melvin and I uh, took society to task and said, narcissism is rampant. And it's not just in North America, it's everywhere. I've been in 6 countries in the last 4 months, and everywhere, South America, Europe, narcissism is nuts. And, my example is, when did the selfie become the most popular form of photography? So,
Mm.
what's the antidote to narcissism? Caring about someone else. Caring about someone else. So, like I said, there may be other things, but what we've been able to discover so far is these two experiences help people get really excited about learning, change. Spending time on feedback does not, it causes stress. Setting specific goals does not at the beginning, it causes specific stress. So a lot of the things that we think help people do the opposite. And in and we know this not just because of the research we do in the coaching research lab at Weatherhead, but also we train coaches. We've been training coaches. I mean, unofficially, I was training coaches since 1990, but we have a whole unit that does it for the past 20 years and a pool of coaches that can offer services to the outside world. But the trick is, well, not the trick, but the approach is that they are trained to use this approach to helping people, not the typical ways that people are certified by many agencies, or as managers, you're taught to, kind of focus on the bottom line, which makes everybody feel like an instrument.
I think Case Western and the Drucker School are probably one of the few business schools on the planet that really put human beings at the center of the teaching process, right?
I agree.
David Cooperrider was on this show very recently, and 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 one of the similarities I think between the two of you is this notion of the dream, right?
Yes.
Like we project forward into what is the reality we want to create.
Right.
It reminds me of one of my favorite studies that I have not forgotten in 30 years since graduate school, of something that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi did with one of his students, and which was a study of 60 men, I think 30 men, all of them came from impoverished backgrounds. 15 stayed impoverished, 15 went on to become world famous experts. And what distinguished the two groups was that the ones who changed their station in life could all point to a very specific book that they had read that gave them the idea, something that you said, that there was more than immediate reality. They could disconnect from their immediate reality. And that book gave them a vision for what reality could be. And because they could imagine that, they were able to realize there could be something else, right?
Right. What opens the door? I mean, we very often say in our coaching work, when you help people, I mean, we call liberation education at times, what you're trying to do by getting this kind of a conversation going, it's like having a flower open up, and all of a sudden you can smell the brilliance of the flower. You can see these amazing colors. And that's what it feels like inside when you tap into this. And I think you're right. I think that it tends to happen. I tend to focus more on the conversations with certain people in your life who have had those moments. But I think it can be possible, if not reinforced, by something you read or even watched.
This notion of the dream can to some seem so frivolous, right? It's like, okay, we're going to go off in unicorn and rainbow land, right?
Right.
But it's really the heart of human capability to be able to generate realities that are not in front of us, right?